All right. So, um, so you have to. We're learning about the principle of bal tashchis, that you have to be careful not to destroy, not only to be destructive to your person, but also not to be destructive to property, whether it's your property or somebody else's property. So, um, okay. All right, so here we had just started the Imrei Yaakov. Let's just start it again. Velo lakalkalo, velo lahaziko. You're not allowed to do anything to harm your body or to damage your body, injure yourself. Kasav harambam reish perakei mehilchos chovel umazik, asr la'adam lachvol bein ba'atzmo bein b'chavero ad kan lashana. The Rambam writes that it is usher for a person to injure himself or his friend. V'yesh omrim dehu isur Torah. And some say that it is a Torah violation. Dehu nichlal ba'azharas v'nishmartem ma'od l'nafsho sechem. And some say that it is included in the pasuk of you must be very careful for your soul. So causing yourself physical damage could be a biblical violation of you shall be very careful for your soul. Don't do anything to harm yourself. Now, the ha'achronim danu, and by the way, that would also, that's the reason why smoking, smoking cigarettes or doing any other kind of harmful activity, drinking to excess or, eating too much, right? All of this would be included in this biblical prohibition of v'nishmartem ma'od l'nafsho sechem. The achronim danu imutar la'asot nituach plasti. The achronim deliberate whether you're allowed to have plastic surgery, l'takein o l'shaper tzuraso o eza aver shehu mishuneh, or can you do any other kind of cosmetic surgery to repair, let's say, a limb or a part of your body that is deformed. So is that considered to be self-mutilation? Because you're going under the knife, you're having them cut you, but not for curative purposes, but for cosmetic purposes. So he says, if there's no threat, in other words, if there's no danger at all, in having this procedure, it's certainly permitted. Because the prohibition of injuring yourself does not apply whether the objective of injuring yourself is to help rectify you, even cosmetically to rectify you. Yeah. Any kind of cosmetic surgery is justifiable. But if the surgery involves any kind of danger, so then we need to be more circumspect. And some say that if a person is in pain emotionally, psychologically, from his body image, and the expert doctors feel that they can cure him, but there's still, a certain risk, certain kinds of surgery that can help a person. What happens a lot today? People lose a large amount of weight and they get a lot of excess skin that they need to be fixed as well. And there may be other kinds of surgery where there is a slight risk involved, but it could be the reward cosmetically could be, and quality of life could be quite enhanced. Right. Well, there's a certain level of risk, but it's considered minimal today. The anesthetic risk. Yeah. And furthermore, he says that once there's an activity, that's what's called dashu barabim, that the masses have already allowed themselves to tread in that place, so then that's no longer considered a sakana. In other words, if no one bats an eye to submit themselves to such a procedure, because it's considered acceptable risk. So then you're allowed to go ahead and do it. And it's interesting because the Avnei Nezer, he says, he quotes from the Avnei Nezer, and you have to understand the Avnei Nezer lives at the end of the 19th century, right? So he writes, "Shadan le'inin liyasher regel akum shel tinok." He deliberates about straightening the crooked leg of a child, and the doctors say that we have to do a certain surgical procedure, and we can straighten your child's leg and what's it called, certain clubbed foot or whatever it is, and we can fix your child's leg. Because of shamdim ze al yedei nituach lo hayiti maskim klal lasot hanituach shekol nituach bechezkat sakana. He says, if it involves surgery, I would never permit it, he says, because every surgery involves danger. And even though the doctors are very confident and they say everything's going to be okay, I would still not agree because we know of too many mishaps that take place. Now, remember, that's late 19th century, okay? If I was living in the late 19th century and a doctor offered to do surgery, I also would turn it down, right? Because situations were a lot different. Even in the beginning of the 20th century, situations were a lot different, right? And so, there was the hygiene was completely different. The protocols were completely different. So, yeah, you have to be much more careful back then. But today, it's a whole different ballgame. And he writes, as a matter of fact, he quotes the Hilchos Yaakov, because of Sham. The Hilchos Yaakov is Rav Breisher, if I'm not mistaken. And he writes but that's 20th century, and he writes, because of Sham da aflamashakas of ha'avnei nezer hainu bismano. He said that which the Avnei Nezer wrote was only in his day. Aval bismanenu she'inyan harafua hitkadem harbe. But in our times, when medicinal technology has advanced significantly, yesh lismoch ala mirat harofim ayin sham. And you can certainly rely on what the doctors tell you. And he also quotes that there's a tshuva from Rav Moshe, the inyan hotzaz damo avor tashlum. Can a person donate their blood for money? I don't know if people do that anymore, but it used to be that you could donate blood and get paid for it. That's what junkies would do. At least in the old movies, that's what they would do. Okay. But donation of blood is considered to be completely safe today as well. All right. Okay. Next, memtes bima'odo, right? That you have to be very careful with your ma'odo, hainu pirush bimamono, with your money, right? Because that's based on the pasuk v'chol levavecha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha, that you have to love Hashem with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your ma'od. And so Chazal say that your soul means even if you have to give up your life, you have to serve Hashem. You can't violate a mitzvah. And ma'odo means you have to be prepared to die for certain things. And b'ma'odo means with all your money, right? Oh, korea begadim. You're not allowed to tear clothing because otherwise you're in violation of bal tashchis. Be'imkara b'makom hatfira she'enu nechsar b'damav b'kach kegon b'shula ve'no over. If you tear, even gratuitously, you tear a garment along the seam so that you're just undoing the stitching to put two pieces of fabric together, you're not in violation because they can always be repaired. Ma'abed ma'achalos. Another thing that you're not allowed to do is to destroy food. So here's an interesting question. What about a person who's bulimic, right? What is bulimia? A person makes themselves throw up. Mostly occurs with women, unfortunately, teenage women. They stick their finger down their throat or they cause themselves to vomit so that they lose weight. But they engorge themselves on food first and like really go to town, right? Fill themselves up and then they throw it up. So ein osin apictozin, dahainu lahachnis hayad letoch grono ad sheyaki hama'achal. So that you're not allowed to do because you're committing an act of baltashchis. Because why? Because you're wasting the food. In other words, you're not allowed to cause yourself to vomit mishum hefsed ochlin. The imitztaer mirov ma'achol, but that's only if you had in mind when you were eating the food that you were going to, you'll pig out, as they say, and then you're going to force yourself to vomit. But what if? And by the way, the Romans used to do it also, the vomitoriums, because that way they would have their orgies for days on end, and they would keep eating and then just vomit it up afterwards. Not very healthy to do. Now, the imitztayer mirov ma'achal, if you are, let's say you feel you're going to be sick, let's say it wasn't deliberate, right? Let's say you ate something and it's really not agreeing with you, and you feel better if you just would throw it out up and get it out of your body. B'chol mutar afilu bisam. So then during the week, it would be permitted to force yourself to vomit, even if you were to use what's ipecac? Is that what it's called, Joby? The ipecac thing that you give to.
Yeah, it's ipecac is the right stuff.
Shabbos aser b'sam umutar biyad. But on Shabbos, you can only do it with your finger digitally, but you cannot do it by taking ipecac because there's a rabbinic prohibition of taking medication on Shabbos. And again, obviously, we're talking about a situation where there's no health hazard. Let's say you realize you just ate something that you have an allergy to. So then even taking ipecac would be permitted, or if a person took too many pills or whatever it was. So then even on Shabbos, you could take whatever you need to do in order to save yourself from any kind of sakana, right? All right. So maybe let's see what's next. Korea begadim. Let's take a look at the likutim. The person tears his clothing. Korea al beito. When you're doing kriya, the person, God forbid, becomes an avel, and he needs to tear kriya. Asr lo likroa yoter mikafi hadin deka'avra al bal tashchis. You're not allowed to tear more than what the halacha tells you. In other words, don't do 2 tears, just do 1 tear. Why? Because otherwise you're being over on bal tashchis, right? You're allowed to use the shirt, you're allowed to stitch it up, right? Most people don't, but technically you're allowed to stitch it up, right? So memory serves me, that's in all cases. I have to go back and review the halacha. But let's say you wanted to really show how grieving you are, so that would not be okay, right? Ma'abed ma'achalos, osa adam srachav bepas, v'hani mili delo mamis bei, ayin sham kama pratim. A person is allowed to do whatever he needs to with bread, provided, in other words, bread is considered to be the basic staple of one's diet and can be served with any meal, provided that you don't. And also you can even use it for, let's say, a tray or something like that, provided that it doesn't become spoiled in the process of you using the bread. And maybe what we'll do is we'll take a look when we have more time. We'll look at the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kuf Ayin Aleph, and we'll go further on that. Let's hold it here so we can get ready for davening. Have a